this lesson, we are going to talk about pigment making. So we found our mineral pigments. We've now ground them up and into a fine powder and stored them into our glass containers. And now we're going to create some acrylics and some oils, and then we'll move into our watercolors and our pastels. Now, our acrylics and our oils are the easiest to make. So you're gonna need your natural acrylic medium, your pigments, a variety of palette knives, a glass muller, and a glass palette to work on. You have done the legwork at this point by grinding the pigments and sifting them. So once they're at this fine powder, or you've purchased them from Natural Earth Paint or Scribe's ink, you're gonna do 1 part pigment to 1 part of the Natural Earth acrylic right here. And we're just gonna blend it here. Now you can mix it with either your palette knife or with your molar. And when I do small batches, I just usually use my palette knife. But if I'm doing a larger batch that I wanna save in an aluminum tube, so I'll have an empty aluminum tube, I will use my glass molar. And you're just going to gauge it. Sometimes the pigments are all different. Some of them need more of the medium and some need less. So, I would suggest getting a journal out and just kind of experimenting on there. You're going to see if it's really translucent or really, really thick pigment and saturated. And that'll give you a good gauge of how much pigment you need and how much of the natural medium you need. So I'm going to take a little bit of this pigment here and show you also how to mix. So I have some white ochre here. Natural Earth Paint also has a titanium white. And just mix it directly on to my palette, and show you that you can really change the color and do mixing no matter what. You can mix yellow and red to make your orange, or you can make variations by adding in the white right here. And for the majority of this class, I'm just going to be doing mixing right on my palette because I'm not doing large batches. I want you to just kind of see the process. But again, if I were going to transfer it into my aluminum tube, I would just pick it up with my palette knife and put it directly on there. But I want to show you what the molar looks like. So you're going to kind of hold it real tight and then loosely go in different directions. Do figure eights, go in circles. You're going to kind of just have different movements to really blend these two colors together. And again, I don't mind using my palette knife for small batches, but to get it really blended well, especially if you're doing a lot of mixing, I would suggest using your glass molar. And already I know I want to put some more of this white pigment down. I really want it to be quite a bit lighter than my top pigment. So I'm going to put quite a bit here and do a little bit more mixing. And I know that I'll need a little bit more acrylic medium as well. And it takes time. You're just going to gauge it. And again, each pigment is different. But just make sure you get kind of that creamy feel, just like you would of paints, as you're blending in the pigments and your acrylic medium. And, try both. Try the glass molar and try your palette knife. And see what works best for you. And again, if you're doing large batches or a lot of mixing, I would suggest the molar. But otherwise, the palette knife does work really good in small quantities. And you just, keep blending and flip the palette knife over because there will be pigment on both sides. So you want to be sure that it blends really nicely there. And next, this is where you want to get your journal out and, take notes. It's really important as you're starting out with your pigment making, to take notes of, was it 1 part pigment to 1 part of the medium? Is it working well? Is it saturated enough? Which, here it looks very saturated, and then I'm testing it with a little bit of water to see what it looks like there. So I know that this is a really nice blend, but if I added more of the acrylic medium, it would be a little bit more translucent. So you get a variety just based on how you mix it right here on your palette. And this looks really good here too. It's the right amount of pigment, and then I'm just blending it with my water. And I would just take notes of, where the pigment was found, how many parts of each I was using. And this will be a great way for you to reference back to in the future if you want to recreate these exact colors, or especially when you're doing a lot of mixing with your pigments. Just like when you're sourcing your pigments, you really do want to take some really good notes in your journal when you're doing the pigment making, and especially when you're doing your mixing, so you can refer back to them. And I talked earlier about your aluminum tubes, your empty aluminum tubes. So you can find these in our art supply list, but what you're going to do is just take your palette knife and scoop it into these empty aluminum tubes. And dump it to the very bottom. And then you're going to kind of, once it's in there, you're going to roll it with either your palette knife or a metal ruler to the very end where the paint is, to make sure there's not a lot of air. And then you can keep those and reuse them as you need. Next, we're going to create our oil paints. So you're just going to be working with your natural pigments, your minerals. And, I have them in my glass containers. They came from the ochras, the white ochre, and, the blue ochre here. And they're ground up already into this fine pigment. And, they're all going to be the ochres are a lot softer versus, some of the minerals are a little bit thicker or, harder to grind up. So they're a little bit more coarse. And then I'm going to be using my walnut oil. You can also use linseed oil. So with your oil paints, you're going to have your glass molar, your glass palette, and your palette knife, just like you did with your acrylics. And you're going to put the pigment down, the dry pigment, and kind of put it in a certain area all together. You kind of want to create a mound or a little mountain of this pigment. And then you're going to either use your finger or the bottom of the palette knife to just create a little bit of a crater. And that's where your oils are going to go, so it doesn't go all over the palette. And, you can use either a dropper, or you can just be really careful as you pour it. And you're just going to pour it right here into this crater on the mound of your pigment. And you can see here, my drop just sat there perfectly, but sometimes it kind of seeps over. And this just helps it so you don't waste the oil and it doesn't seep all over your workspace. And I'm just going to blend this with my palette knife again. And, I can already see I just need a little bit more oil because it's not mixing very well. So you can also put it to the side and then bring it over if you want. Just be careful of it not just dripping all over your workspace. And just blend this, moving the palette back and forth, or taking your molar and just really gently going, in different directions. You're going to see here, it creates this almost beautiful pattern on the bottom of the molar. And that'll give you also a gauge if you need more or less pigment based on how it looks on the bottom. It's just beautiful. It actually is a really gorgeous pattern that it creates. But you can start to see if it's either too translucent, or which would mean you would need more pigment, or it's really heavy saturated, and that would mean you would just need a little bit more of the oil. And again, it's a process. You just have to kind of practice and take note of, how many drops of oil you put in it versus the pigment. And that's going to vary depending on which color you are mixing. You can see I did some more mixing and I put the samples into my journal for reference. Now, remember to scrape off the molar as well, because there's a lot of paint at the bottom of that, a lot of pigment that you can use and utilize. The beauty of oils is, you can just work with them right here. They last a little bit longer, or you could put it on to like a palette like this, and put them in here, or use once again your aluminum tubes that are empty and just contain it there. And throughout the course, I'll just be working directly on my palette, but I also wanted to show you how to clean your palette. I have a large scraper over here, so I'd be using that and some of my EcoSolve or Gamsol just to clean the palette once you're done. And you'll do the same with your molar. Just gently scrape the paint and, put it in a pile so that it doesn't go to waste. And then whatever is remaining, you can clean your palette off with the EcoSolve.